2, 1.
Welcome in. It's the Husker Extra podcast. I'm Parker. There's Sipple. As you can tell, we're down a man. Chris Basnet, paternity leave. He'll be back at some point.
Yeah, big congrats to Mr. and Mrs. Baz.
Yes, absolutely.
And Palmer?
Yeah, and Palmer, little Palmer.
Welcome to the world, Palmer.
Welcome to the world. I can only imagine that Palmer will gain infinite wisdom, not only from his father, more likely from his mom, but also from the Husker Extra podcast.
Yes, Palmer, if you need any tips on just how to push forward in your young life, feel free.
Yep. It's 2021, Sipple, and the Husker Extra podcast lives. How about that?
Yeah, this is our first podcast of 2021.
It is. It's our first podcast in a couple weeks.
Yeah, that alone makes it monumental.
The football season ended, and our regularity went completely out the window immediately. It's amazing what kind of structure. I think that this probably pertains. This is really apropos of not much, but I'm sure it pertains to players and coaches. Certainly pertains to us. It's amazing how much structure the season gives your day-to-day work life when you're just your life in general, I guess, when you are around it a lot.
Right. And you probably handle the end of the season better than I do. When the lack of structure disappears, my lack of structure completely goes awry.
Oh, mine. Yeah. It takes over for me too, to some degree. But the interesting thing is even the end of the season lacked structure this year because we didn't know if they were going to play in a bowl game or what. And so even that was sort of like, oh, I guess it's just sort of weird and it's over. And what do we do now?
Yeah, there's a lot of people in that lack of structure boat, I'm sure.
Yeah, there are. And, to be honest, maybe this is where we can start today. One of the groups that has a lot less structure than normal is the senior class. Those guys, instead of just having their eligibility expire, they each have the option of whether they're going to come back to Nebraska or not. Among the seniors for the Nebraska's football program, a quick rundown, and then we can sort of get into maybe some prognosticating or just thinking about, what the next few weeks look like on that front. We know JoJo Doman is coming back, and we know among seniors that Bo Wilson is not the offensive lineman. We know that Jack Stoll is not, and we know that DiCaprio Boodle is not. Am I missing someone in that group? Cam Taylor-Britt was another big announcement. Obviously, he's a junior. And so, yeah, there's been a couple of walk-ons that have, said they're going to transfer. But among scholarship guys, I think that's where we're at this point, right?
Yes, I think you've covered them all.
So that leaves 4 guys on defense and 2 on offense left to decide. We've got Matt Farniak and Dedrick Mills, the running back, on offense. And then on defense, we've got Ben Stilley, Will Honus, and the 2 safeties, Markel Dismuke and Deontay Williams.
Right. And I don't know. It is right now 4:21 on Friday afternoon. 4:21 on Friday afternoon. And we don't know exactly what Dedrick Mills, for instance, is going to do. But I think I would say that I'm a hard lean against him coming. I don't think I'm a hard lean in thinking he won't come back. And that's just not based on nothing. I mean, we talk to people.
Right.
I don't think you'll see Dedrick Mills come back. I don't think you'll see Matt Farniak come back. I do think you're going to get several defenders back in that crowd that you mentioned. Several, more than 2.
Yeah,
more
which
than
would
2.
Be, yeah, which it's interesting. I mean, that obviously, I think in the last week or so that both Doman and Taylor-Britt have announced they're coming back defensively. That's obviously important for Eric Chenander and for the defensive unit. I mean, Taylor-Britt and Doman obviously are 2 of the best players, not only on the defense, but probably on the roster at this point. And then on top of that, the guys that are still in the mix that you think there's at least a chance could come back with Stilley, Honus, and the 2 safeties. I mean, you're talking about you're talking about with Dismuke, Williams, and Honus. I mean, you're talking about three of the maybe 5 or 6 top tacklers on the team, and Doman was also in that conversation too. I mean, Doman was the
leading tackler.
And then I think Will Honus was next, just one behind maybe. So you're talking about a lot of production, a lot of snaps. That's sort of in the mix to come back. Obviously, with those 4 guys, we don't know that for sure at this point. But what would it mean? Let's say sort of to your number. Let's say the 2 front 7 guys, Stilly and Honus, ended up coming back, and then even one of the 2 safeties. I mean, you would start at that point thinking about setting the bar pretty high for this defense in 2021, wouldn't you?
Right. I think they ended the season ranked 52nd in total defense. So, you say they were a top 50 defense to end the season. Then I think going into next season, the expectation should be they should be a top 30 to 35 defense. And if they're making the sort of progress that you think on that side of the ball, that's where they should be. And that's probably a light expectation. I mean, if I were Chenander, my thinking would be we should be guys with everything we have back and the experience we have back. We should be a top 25 defense, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to overdo it. I mean, it wasn't like they were dominating. They were 52nd.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, but that's a lot of, but then part of it too is you're not just, there's 2 parts of this equation, and one sort of tugs in each direction, I guess, in my mind. On the high expectations front, you've got not only in this scenario that we're sort of just exploring right now, that not only do you have a lot of production back in those guys, but start thinking about the position groups. On the defensive line, you'd have every major contributor back. Keem Green is in the portal. He didn't play very much at all this year. And other than that, all those guys, at least at this point, you never know what happens over the rest of the offseason, but your main guys would all be back on that front. At inside linebacker, you'd have to replace Colin Miller, who, as we know, is medically retiring. But some of the best that Nebraska played at inside, Colin Miller, don't get me wrong, I mean, he was a big addition to the defense. He was a captain. Eric Chenander and Scott Frost called him the soul of the defense. But that inside linebacker group played well down the stretch with Honus and Reimer, and then some Nick Henrich mixed in the last week or 2 of the season. So you've just got
Jesus. Yeah.
Keep
going.
And then in the secondary, if you're talking about both Dismuke and Williams back, you've got to replace a full-time player in DiCaprio Boodle. But if there's a position, like Nebraska's not extremely deep at corner, but they have guys that they feel like are starting caliber players that haven't stepped into those roles yet. I mean, I thought the 2 times that Cam Taylor-Britt was ejected this past year, I mean, there was no time where you're like, oh man, they're really struggling with Quinton Newsome out there. You barely even recognize he was on the field. That's typically a pretty good sign if you're a corner.
Absolutely.
And then you've got Braxton Clark.
Yeah,
who was probably going to push for playing time this year. He's 6'4", coming back off a shoulder injury that happened, sort of like a freak thing that happened during
October.
Camp. Just the whole year.
Yeah, it happened I think it was October 10th. Does that sound right?
That's a level of detail that I hadn't considered.
Well, when their first game was
the 24th.
October 24th, and it happened in what we called camp. I think it was October 10th.
Yes. Okay. I believe you. So anyway, I mean, so at that point, you're talking about, and maybe the biggest question mark on the defense this past year was at outside linebacker. You saw signs of progress from guys like Caleb Tanner and Garrett Nelson. And then you get JoJo Doman, who was the only full-time player in that group, back for another year. You're just talking about a wealth of experience on the defense. If out of those 4 guys that still have yet to announce decisions, you get all 4 back for sure. And even if you get 2 or 3 back, I mean, you're really talking about what's going to be an experienced defense. Now, the thing that tugs the other way at that is other teams in the Big Ten might be more experienced than they've been in recent years too.
Yeah.
Because other teams have old guys coming back too. So it's not like Nebraska is getting all this experience back and nobody else is. Other teams will too. And it'll just be about who gets better quicker, like it always does. But I think with where Nebraska's at and where the defense finished this year, if they were to get several of those guys back, like you said, Sip, you'd have to like where they stand at this point.
Yeah, they played pretty good down the stretch. I mean, they had a good game against Rutgers. Against Minnesota, not great. They played fine. They, like Frost would say, they played well enough to win that game.
Yeah.
Purdue, I thought they played well. Iowa, they played well. There's just that Illinois game where they're terrible. But by and large, the defense played well enough for them to win, to have a good season.
Yeah.
And it's, what's the conversation now, Parker? It's that the defense is ahead of the offense. It's hard to say how far. Well, it's not that hard to say. The offense, I don't know. What the offense finished ranked nationally?
Oh, that's a good question. You want
so check that out.
You want yards per play or yards per game?
Yeah, I think you could go.
Play.
Yeah, yards per play would be good.
All right, let's take a look. You can keep talking. I know you might not be familiar with how.
So here's the deal. What we all agree now, I think the fan base, media, whatever, the defense is ahead of the offense. The question is how far.
Yeah.
And that's what. Let's face it. In a sense, Frost needs to close the gap on that discussion this year, because if he does, that'll determine probably what type of season they can have.
Nebraska 72nd nationally in yards per play and 101st nationally in scoring.
So 101st nationally in scoring is they obviously got to get a lot better there. And I'm proceeding as if they won't have Mills,
right,
which is that's significant.
Yeah,
because a lot of us thought going into the season that was your key player on offense. It didn't turn out that way, in part because he got hurt, but in part because I don't think they used him like they should. So that's just an opinion, and it's debatable, but I didn't think they should. I didn't think they used him like they should.
It's interesting because you wouldn't say that he was a central you wouldn't, like you say, you wouldn't necessarily say that he was the most important player on the offense, but you could go into this offseason making that argument again about next year, because even though he didn't have the kind of final season that you maybe would have expected, neither did any of the young running backs. So that doesn't categorically rule any of those guys out from being productive players over the course of their career. But if you were to draw up a list of the scholarship backs on the roster, and right now, if we're taking Mills out of the equation, you have Ramir Johnson, Ronald Tompkins, Marvin Scott, Savion Morrison, and then Gabe Irvin arriving on campus in January. Like, none of those guys have proven that they can be down in and down out, every down back. Now, Nebraska didn't really even use Mills very often in that role in 2020, but they've said over and over again that they want a guy who can be an every down back. We have not seen evidence that any of those guys are that at this point on a Big Ten football team. Now, there could be, it doesn't mean they can't be, but we just haven't seen it to this point.
Yeah, it looks like a committee right now. And I don't think that's what they want necessarily. That's why we keep talking about this Dedrick Mills decision, because he does look like a guy. Well, come on. They said before the season, Ryan Held said he's our bell cow back.
Yep.
But they didn't really use him like a bell cow, again, in part because he was hurt. But Parker, okay, so what? Okay, we have this conversation, and he wasn't the bell cow back because of injury mainly because he was hurt in the Penn State game in the first series, missed the rest of that game, and then the next two. So he was out 3 of the games. The game that stands out, though, is the one you scratch your head on as it applies to Dedrick, was the Minnesota game, when they played a defense that ranked last in the Big Ten defending the run, and he carried 12 times, and I believe went 13 plays between carries at one point.
Yeah.
Which, I don't like to question play calling because there's a lot that goes into play calling that you just don't know from your vantage point in the press box with half a sandwich in your mouth. But
sometimes literally half a sandwich.
but anyway, Frost, when he thought he would run the ball, he threw the ball against Minnesota a lot. And it was perplexing with a healthy Dedrick Mills.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I 100% I agree with you, but the difference in the way that Dedrick Mills looked against Rutgers compared to what he looked like any time before that was surprising to me. I mean, didn't you think I thought he looked substantially more healthy against Rutgers than he did at any other point in the year. And maybe it just was he was geared up. He knew it was the last one of the year or whatever, but I just thought he had more burst in that game than he runs hard all the time, but I thought he was sharper by quite a bit against Rutgers than he was before that.
Yeah. I think so. I think so. I think against Minnesota, there was a couple runs he looked pretty good.
Yeah.
But
it looked like they would have been able to do some damage in that game.
Yeah. So that's that. We're just sort of waiting for decisions by those seniors, and it's significant. These are significant stories coming. So keep hitting HuskerExtra.com.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that makes the beginning of this that conversation in and of itself makes the beginning of this offseason different from really any in the past. I mean, there are programs out there, at the end of the year, Ohio State and Alabama, they're wondering about a dozen guys if they're going to turn pro, underclassmen, they're going to turn pro or come back or whatever. And so that hasn't obviously been the case at Nebraska for the past few years. There's been key decisions with underclassmen here and there, and Cam Taylor-Britt was certainly, one of them this year. But that's sort of step one for the offseason, but it makes a big difference too, because at least to my mind, I mean, I don't know, Scott Frost might tell you different, but to my mind, what Nebraska does in terms of recruiting in the transfer portal could change a lot depending on, if Dedrick Mills comes back or doesn't he. And if you get 1, 2, or 0 back between Dismuke and Deontay Williams, I would think that if Mills leaves, that running back would be maybe priority number one in the transfer portal. But if he's back, like, you really probably don't need one at all. And so you can make this. I think if both safeties were to leave, you would want a defensive back out of the portal. And if both come back, you don't need one. So it really, and there are kids in the portal who are committing to schools yesterday, next week. So it's sort of like Nebraska may know more than we do about where those players stand, and you can recruit even if you don't know for sure if a guy's coming back or not. But those things are happening concurrently, right? Like both of those conversations. What do our recruiting needs look like for our last 4 spots in the 2021 class? How many of them do we want to use in the portal? Are we positioning targeted positions or just best player available? All of that stuff is sort of happening, right now.
Couldn't you recruit a running back though? Even if you didn't know about Dedrick, just recruit him, and it doesn't affect your scholarship count, right?
Right. No, not unless a kid were to show up on camp. I think right now it's interesting. You're seeing a rush sort of on the portal right now in terms of kids committing or finding places. And a lot of that's because if you're a graduate transfer and you can leave right now, then you can be on campus for spring semester and go through spring ball and all of that. I mean, that one wave of transfers, that will be their situation. Chris Kolarovec, the linebacker from Northern Iowa, who committed to Nebraska a few weeks ago, he graduated last month from Northern Iowa, so he'll be on campus in 2 weeks, along with those mid-year freshman enrollees. So certainly, like, the next couple of weeks, if you were to get a guy who was available right away and was coming to campus, there'd be some benefit in that because they could go through winter conditioning and be here for, 8 months before the season starts. But besides that, which is always a conversation recruiting, yeah, I mean, you could recruit. There'll be more guys going in the portal in a month and after spring ball and all of that. And so, if you really need a running back or a safety or whatever, there are going to be options pretty much every day between now and kickoff against Illinois. So,
Yeah,
it's crazy how many players there are.
The other thing people are going to wonder is about staff changes. Mm-hmm. Whether there'll be any, what they might look like. And now it's 4:38, and there's nothing today.
17 minutes later and nothing's happened.
I think you would say, you would agree with me that we would not rule out anything.
Don't you, I don't necessarily mean this in terms of like staff changes right now, but like as a reporter, isn't it sort of like ingrained in your mind when 4:30 on a Friday hits, like, it's news dump time.
Yeah. I can see that you're looking at your computer. We don't know of anything that's coming. Now, I would say that given what you said about the offense's rank, 102nd in scoring offense, and what we know about the offense and its struggles and how it's continued to sort of decline in the last few years, I would not be surprised if Scott made some sort of change on offense.
Yeah.
You almost, I mean, it would certainly make sense. And I'm not calling for changes, but I mean, when you're underperforming in certain areas, any manager of anything, if there's an entity that's underperforming, some managers are pretty aggressive about saying we can't allow this to continue to happen.
Yeah,
we have to make changes. So I would be a little bit surprised if he didn't make a change.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if nothing happened the rest of it.
And you've talked about this. In this day and age, a lot of coaches just matriculate on their own too. Mm-hmm. That can happen. That could happen. But when I talk about change, I'm talking about a forced change by the leadership.
The matriculation is happening to you. You're not.
You're not doing this on your own necessarily. But these conversations are interesting, Parker, because they're not all cut and dried. I mean, there are guys that move on because they sense that they should move on. There are guys that move on because they're urged to move on, and there are guys that move on because they're told to move on.
Yeah, right.
And there's just so it's not always framed up perfectly, and usually it's not framed up at all for us.
Right.
You kind of got to figure it out on your own. That's
you just typically hear they're moving on, or and the interesting thing about that, one of the many interesting things about that is obviously I think Nebraska's had at least one full-time assistant turnover every year since 2012 or something like that. So in that regard, you're talking about 3 coaching staffs. It's clearly not, look at the number of staff jobs, head coaching and otherwise, coordinators and assistants mostly, that are open right now. And you get a sense for why it doesn't always happen right when the season ends either. In 2000, so two off seasons ago, Mike Dawson left for the NFL, but that didn't happen until February. They hired Tony Tuioti like a week or so before spring ball started in February of 2019. And then last year, I think that Javon DeWitt announced he was moving. He had got the job at North Carolina. That was the first domino that fell there. And that was it was like around this time of year. I think it was like January 10th or so. Okay. Dawson was finalized coming back not that long after that. And then I think that Troy Walters was like late January, around the 20th, mid to second, half of January. So it's definitely, I don't know. You're just sort of coming into the period of time over the next month, I guess, where if stuff like that's going to happen, a lot of times it happens between January 1st and February 10th, so to say.
Well, we'll be ready.
Be on the lookout. I mean, who knows? They could decide that they're on the right path and stand pretty much pat. But like you say, I mean, you just expect between a coach thinking that he needs to maybe make a change somewhere, and then also just the fact that guys move around. I mean, a lot of these coaches, look at their resumes. I mean, a lot of them are nomads, basically. And so you just happens at almost every school, almost every offseason.
Yeah, and it's happening right now. I mean, there's hirings and there's guys leaving and coming and going. This is when it happens. So
a lot of matriculating.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of that going around. All right. Any hoops thoughts that you have, Parker?
Hoops.
It's a critical game to me that Nebraska has against Indiana on Sunday at 5 p.m. because it is a game that you would look at and say that's one on the schedule that I'm not going to say should be able to get, but it's more gettable than a lot of them. So in that sense, there's some urgency. Nebraska's 4-7 and 0-4. And it's, they've lost 21 straight Big Ten games. That'll wear on you. Not these players have, though. It's not like these players have. A few of them have, but the coaching staff.
We feel good about that game happening as scheduled.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we feel very good about it happening. Nebraska, the men did not practice Wednesday. I did see a report that they practiced Thursday. I didn't know that. I wasn't positive about that. They didn't practice Wednesday.
Right.
So I think they're back at it. And they're playing. The game will transpire Sunday unless there's something that crops up late. And I'll tell you, Parker, in this world right now in college basketball, where earlier in the week it was an average of 9 games a day being canceled or postponed, and you don't really count on anything until the day of the game. Yeah. But right now it looks like 5 p.m. will be the 5 p.m. tip-off in Lincoln against Indiana.
And they had a game. The reason we're talking about that is because they had the game postponed that was originally scheduled for Tuesday.
At Purdue. Yeah. The big news being Derek Walker for Nebraska making his debut as a Nebraska player. That will happen, assuming the game goes on Sunday.
Yep, it's going to be interesting. I'm curious about Derek Walker's impact, and I think we should be careful, and you have been, I think we have been in general, about overstating, what adding Derek Walker to the rotation probably gives you, at least right away. But I do think like the way that I can see the impact showing up, at least early on, depending on how many minutes he plays and all of that, is just a big body, not only to rebound, but there's certain situations where, a guy that can just set a good hard ball screen, get a guard going Absolutely. Downhill, toward the rim, a guy who can, root out a post player or make running the baseline off a screen a little more unpleasant for a shooter on the other team, just to give you something to navigate through in the paint. I think is, that can be a big guy like that can, I guess, make a difference without getting 10 and 8, right? I mean, just to do some of the little dirty stuff on the floor that even if you have guys like Teddy Allen will go in there and scrap, and they've got guys, they have guards that are willing to go rebound, but it makes a difference. It makes a difference when you're 260 pounds. So,
well, he's 6'8", 232.
230. There you go.
Yeah, 230. That's big. He's a big man. Yeah,
he's big enough to go in there and bang around.
Yes, 6'8", 232. He's not enormous, and he's not. I hope people aren't expecting he's a below the rim player, but Fred said he is their best finisher at the rim. So that could be helpful. Now you want to watch how how well he plays the pick and roll game is a big thing these days, obviously, and how well he defends the pick and roll is going to be important. Those two things are big. But you're absolutely right that his presence could be helpful, especially as a finisher, because as you know, Nebraska hasn't been a great shooting team. And that problem is exacerbated by the fact that teams can shade their defense outside because of Nebraska's lack of consistent inside scoring.
So welcome back after, nearly, 20 months or more, 22 months. Guys have played in almost 2 years. Welcome back. Here's Trace Jackson Davis for your first.
As you pointed out. Yeah, as you said, as you sent me last night, Trace Jackson Davis, number 2 in the Ken Palm Player of the Year, national Player of the Year standings. Not Big Ten Player of the Year standings, although they might as well be the Big Ten Player of the Year standings, because 4 of the top 5 guys in the National Player of the Year standings are from the Big Ten. Go ahead, Parker.
Yeah, Garza, number 1, Trace Jackson Davis, number 2. And then I think Drew Timme from Gonzaga. No, Desunmu, number 3.
Yeah.
Iota Sunmu from Illinois, number 3. Then Timme from Gonzaga, and then Hunter Dickinson, the freshman from Michigan,
that's the one that caught my eye.
Playing his butt off.
Yeah, already considered in consideration for National Player of the Year.
He's shooting 73% from the field.
The question now, and I haven't heard much discussion about it, but is he a one and done type player?
I was curious about that. I don't normally NBA. I don't pay that close of attention to the NBA, just generally speaking. So NBA, I don't frequent NBA mock drafts, but I checked one out from, I think it was Sam Veceni today for that exact reason. I was curious if Hunter Dickinson was a draft pick, first round, whatever. I think he had him like early second at this point.
Early second. Again, question will be, can he particularly defend the pick and roll in the NBA? The NBA, I can tell you this, Parker, as the resident Hubie Brown.
Yes.
There's not a lot of just back to the basket post play where you feed the wing and the wing waits 3 seconds for the big man to get open, and then he just maneuvers. You don't see that. I mean, there's some of that, but you don't see it very often. It becomes very much a pick and roll discussion. And I bet that Hunter Dickinson can run the pick and roll just fine. The question will be, can he defend the pick and roll in the NBA?
Just like you were talking about with Derek Walker.
That's a big part of it. And is he physical enough to defend the DeAndre Aytons and, the Rudy Gobert's, those just enormous human beings in that league that run the pick and roll pretty well? How will the Joker, you defend the Joker?
It's
Who's
super interesting.
defending the Joker right now? I mean, is anybody? The guy's having a monster year.
See that shot he hit? Did you see that shot he hit to tie the game and send it to overtime last night?
No.
Yeah, they had an inbound. Look at me. I sound like an NBA guy, even though
Yeah, you are.
I watched like 5 minutes of Denver last night.
Yes. Who are they playing?
Utah, I think.
Okay, good matchup.
Oh no, they're playing Dallas. They're playing against Luka Doncic.
Luka.
So Doncic pick and roll, hit or pick and pop, found a guy that hit a 3 to put him up 2 with like a second and a half left. Of course, the ball got advanced, and they threw it in. And he just took one dribble. It looked like he was playing horse. One dribble, long 2, lofted it up, bottom.
Yeah,
overtime.
He's having an MVP year. He and Steph Curry would probably be your MVP leaders right now.
It's interesting. I was listening to, I don't remember the kid's name. James Wiseman, the big guy that plays for the rookie for the Warriors. And I saw a clip on Twitter the other day of Draymond Green, like 2 minutes of Draymond Green talking sort of like in depth about why James Wiseman had handled the pick and roll better that night as compared to getting ripped up by Portland a few nights before that. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not easy.
No, it's not.
Trace Jackson Davis, back to the matter at hand, Indiana, big guy. Last 3 games, overtime win against Penn State, win against Maryland, double overtime loss against Wisconsin last night. 21-6, 22-15, 23-12.
Yeah, he'll be difficult. Now, he'll be difficult enough. We'll see if Ivan Drago's health allows him to play. We don't know that. And that would be, now think about Derek Walker's first run at it against a bona fide National Player of the Year candidate. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome to the Big Ten. And otherwise, it would have come again. Otherwise, it would have come again on Tuesday. It would have been Travion Williams and that 7'3" guy that Purdue has. So
right, and then after Illinois or after Indiana, it'll be Kofi Coburn.
Yeah,
who's only 7 foot.
The Big Ten's a monster. Yeah. Did you see what Illinois did? Yeah. Did you see what Illinois did last night?
No. What did they do?
They were down by 15 at halftime to Northwestern. Yeah. And then the first 15 minutes of the second half, they outscored Northwestern 45-11.
Oh, that's some explosion because Northwestern's good. I mean, Northwestern was a top 25 team at one point. I don't know if they still are.
They turned a 15-point deficit into a double-digit lead in 8 minutes.
Yeah, they're explosive. They're explosive.
They are.
They're explosive athletically.
Yep. Well, it'll be interesting. We'll hear from Fred Hoiberg tomorrow, Saturday, and then game on Sunday, obviously, and then football. Like you said before, it's just sort of we'll see what happens. You expect some of those announcements to roll out in the coming days. They'll all probably be wrapped up in the next 10 days. Certainly could have action on that, through the weekend, and then we'll see what happens with the rest of it. If there's anybody incoming player-wise, transfer or recruit, if there's any movement on the staff, all that, we'll have all of that for you. HuskerExtra.com.
All right, Parker, thank you.
Hey, thank you. We'll even have Baz back at some point. But until then, check HuskerExtra.com for all the latest, and thanks for watching.